Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. Join us at our kitchen table twice a week as the Mighty Married Moms, Debbie, Linda, Wendy,
invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying sexy, vibrant, and healthy,
building marriages with soul-satisfying connection, raising happy, healthy, successful kids. Conversations with Mighty Married Moms will bring you closer to the life you really want. Episode 31. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Mighty Married Moms. We are really fortunate and blessed to be able to introduce you today to Professor KC Haydon. She's an assistant professor of psychology at Mount Holyoke College, which is my alma mater, and I'm really excited about that.
Great.
Yeah. And she earned her BA in psychology from Mount Holyoke and her PhD in child psychology from the University of Minnesota. Her research examines romantic relationships, parent-child relationships, and friendships, and how these close relationships support human development across the lifespan. So, Professor Haydon, thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited about having this conversation.
So am I. Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Good. So let's just start by having you tell us a little bit first about how you got to where you are right now. I mean, very briefly, what was your journey to being where you are in the seat today?
You know, when I started at Mount Holyoke, I was quite positive that I was going to be a journalist in Beijing.
Wow.
Obviously it didn't work out. I took a class at Mount Holyoke that was about attachment theory, which is the idea that the close relationships we have in childhood really kind of set the stage for how we approach the rest of our important relationships across the lifespan.
Right.
And, no pun intended, I completely fell in love. And lo and behold, here I am. I worked for 2 years as a research assistant in Boston after college, and then I went off to graduate school and somehow managed to find my way back to Mount Holyoke, which is my home, and I'm thrilled to be back.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We were talking before we recorded that it's great to be able to go home, and someday maybe I'll be able to go home to Mount Holyoke too, so that's great.
Come back anytime. We'd love to have you.
Excellent, excellent.
Everybody call it home?
A lot of us do, I think.
Yeah.
The students call it Mo home these days.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, let's dive right in. Let's talk about helicopter parenting, because that was how I kind of discovered you. Obviously, you were a few years behind me at Mount Holyoke, and so I came across an alumna magazine article that was about a study that you had done about helicopter parenting. Can you just give us a quick summary of what that article was about?
Yeah, so I found that my students, who are, in my view, the most wonderfully competent, articulate, inspiring young people, still felt a lot of stress about the idea of graduating from college and kind of having to face the world as an adult for the first time. And I was curious to see that those two things seem to be separate. How can these wonderfully confident, talented people be at the same time very frightened of what the world is going to hold for them? And so I collected survey data from about 200 students at Mount Holyoke, and I asked them, what are all the close relationships in your life, your parents, your friendships, how do you feel about yourself in comparison to your peers? And then I also asked them how they feel about the process of becoming an adult. So, when they think about that jumping off point of graduation, do they feel fear? Do they feel overwhelmed? Do they think they're ready to take on adult roles? And also I asked them, how competent do you feel that you are ready for that? Even if you have fear, do you also feel that you have what it takes to make it, and that you'll kind of find your way and you feel confident that you'll be able to make that transition smoothly?
Right, right. And what were the basic findings from the study?
For better or for worse, I found students express both a lot of stress and a lot of competence. So my kind of anecdotal hunch was right. And surprisingly, parents who were heavily involved in their kids' lives, you'd think, better support would promote the competence piece. But in fact, the more over-involved parents were, the more stress the students reported. And on the flip side, the closer and more supportive they said their friendships were, the more competent and ready they felt to face the transition to adulthood. So it's really interesting to see the different role of these two relationships that are so important in young people's lives.
Can you define what heavily involved means? Yeah. Because I think a lot of parents want to say, oh no, is that me or is it not me?
Right.
Right, exactly, right. I don't think people like to think of themselves as helicopter parents. For better or worse, right? So what I mean is parents who kind of they're heavily involved in areas of their children's life across all domains. So, intense and frequent support in terms of finances, in terms of what psychologists call instrumental support. So things like, running errands or picking this up, dropping this off for you, doing chores on behalf of the kid. And then emotional support, helping the child or even making decisions for the child about social life. Should I go to this party or not? I'm not sure if I should go out on a date with this person or not. Those kinds of decisions that by college age, we would think young people would probably want to do those things for themselves. So that's what I mean. I'm not talking about being close to your child and knowing what's going on in their life and being supportive when they need it. That's a good thing.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the step beyond where the involvement takes away the child's opportunities to try things for themselves and establish a sense of autonomy. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where the line is.
Right. I actually know, I'm going to be clear, I know a helicopter parent. I'm not her, but I do know somebody, but in trying to be kind here and careful. And it really surprised me when this woman knew every single course and what time and helped their freshman, sophomore, junior, senior pick courses. I'm here to tell you we're all in the same age range, you, Debbie, and I. When I drove away in that car to go to my freshman year of school, my parents didn't know Western civilization from Math 101, from if I slept in, if I didn't, and even what grades I got. I might have bragged about a couple of, but I wouldn't have shown knew nothing. And so, but to somebody that went to college within the last 3 or 4 years is going online, helping them pick out, figuring out their schedule.
Right.
You know what? And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Right.
It's so accessible now.
Yeah, there's been a big shift where I think we see parents staying more closely involved in these kinds of things than they have been in the past. And my experience was similar to yours. I don't remember my parents. Well, I was on the other side of the country from them, so they weren't involved in that way. They were supportive from afar. But yeah, I see a lot of that. I see students kind of having parents serving as a manager of their daily lives, and that's where the concern starts to arise. Our children having the opportunity to develop those skills for themselves, eventually they're going to need that, and we start to wonder if they're not getting that now, it's not going to be easier when they're outside of college. Eventually be learning that probably sooner than later.
So what can parents say of, well, we can look at different stages, parents of younger children and parents of teenagers. I mean, what can they do now to set their children up for the most success when they make those transitions?
Yeah, so the thing that I love about development itself is that there are so many transitions, and that's how we grow and turn into the people that we are. It's through encountering new challenges and then adapting to those challenges that we actually become the people that we are and develop the strengths that we have. And I think parents often feel some apprehension about exposing their children to challenges, or feel the need to protect them from failure because that's painful, and no parent wants their child to experience pain or disappointment. But I think to the extent that parents can recognize and respect their children's growing autonomy at developmentally appropriate ways across the lifespan, that really helps kids develop that confidence, And if you think about all the transitions kids go through, everything from like potty training, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
Dropping off at daycare for the first time or even for the first year, transitioning into middle school, trying to decide if you still want to play soccer or not. These are all life decisions that parents can help scaffold in terms of helping children develop the skills to make those decisions, and also help them cope with things if decisions don't work out. That's not the end of the world. And I think if parents can respect those autonomous moments and provide support as needed, but not necessarily protect their children from those challenges, that it's going to instill the kind of self-confidence and self-efficacy that we want our young people to have.
That's right. That's right.
You're speaking to something that's very core to of the three mighty married moms. I'm the woman that is the marriage educator, and so there's a lot in there. And attachment theory, I think of Dr. Sue Johnson, and I that we have some commonalities that we could further discuss at another time. But one of the things that you speak about is, for me, is that I'm not sure what generational or societal push made it important for the two at the top, typically a man and a woman married to one another, turn their focus so fully on their children to the detriment of their own relationship and to the detriment of other things, such that we do have these, I would call them insecure, malformed, not as well developed young people.
Right.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that transition. What inspired this activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm partly trained as a social psychologist, so I tend to see things both, inside the family, but also the environmental context that families exist in these days. And I think one of the things that you raised is really important, which is how the co-parenting relationship operates to sort of preserve a boundary between parents and children. And I think that boundary is important. And to the extent that parents feel like they're working as a team and that they have shared values for the child and that they have space to manage their own relationship and keep that healthy and strong, that frees up energy and resources in the family to actually provide more support to the children. But I think people feel afraid that if they sort of stop monitoring their children to focus on themselves or their partnership, that, it's all going to unravel. I hear that from parents when I talk with them.
And why is our generation worried that it's going to unravel and our parents weren't and our grandparents weren't and those before them weren't?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, the students that I see in my office these days have more pressure than I could possibly have imagined at the same age. And that was only 15 years ago. And so, I think our young people today think overachieving is the new normal. Mm-hmm. They're overscheduled, they're in over their heads, and I think parents feel, and I don't blame them for this. I think parents feel that they want the best outcomes for their children, and that means this really rigorous course of activities and achievement and so on. And so the goal becomes acquiring those opportunities for kids, as opposed, seeing sort of the long view that that's going to help them down the road. But there might be a shorter term cost where the child's really stressed out and the parents don't necessarily know how to help them deal with that in the moment.
Yeah, the race to nowhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I feel as a mom, I have two teenage boys. It is really a struggle to balance how much to keep up with the Joneses, right, and what they're doing with their kids, and how much do I value, because when we were growing up, we went outside in the morning and came home at lunch. We went back out, came home at dinner, and nobody saw us, and we were out doing whatever. And I think I've always felt there's a lot of value in free play and creativity, and you're out there with your relationships, doing whatever you do with your friends, and it's a very different environment. And I think nowadays it feels like, anyway, for me, watching other parents parent and being a parent, is kids are in so many sports or so many activities or so many this or so many that. And I feel like, maybe I'm not doing enough for my kids. Maybe I should be doing more for them. And just the whole, how much do you let them do? They seem very scheduled. And then there's the whole internet piece. Boys in particular, they love hanging out with each other on the screen.
Yeah, and playing those games.
Where they're looking at a screen, but their friend is on, and they're all online together, and they're hanging out, but they're not actually together.
Right.
So that actually brings up a good question, and that is, what are the gender differences in how young people face the transition to adulthood?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. And so on the one hand, we've seen over the last 40 years or so, we've seen huge shifts in terms of the opportunities available for women, changes in how women take up education, marriage, family, career. People are doing these in different orders and diverse pathways through all those options in life, more so than ever. And so we've seen kind of an equalization of how men and women approach those adult roles in some ways, not completely, but in some ways. And on the other hand, there are some researchers in the recent years who claim that despite all of that, we still see gender differences in how young people approach the transition to adulthood. And in particular, one researcher claimed that there might even be two what we call emerging adulthoods, one for men and one for women.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And
it makes sense.
It does make perfect sense.
Yeah, and people who've studied how how young people kind of flourish or flounder in that transition, find that men tend to flounder more so, while women tend to flourish either more so or perhaps earlier, because girls are still sort of ahead in some ways at this point in development. But even though the girls are flourishing, they're way more stressed out. So more anxiety, more depression, also a sense of imposter syndrome. Feeling that despite their achievements and despite the flourishing, they haven't really earned it, or it's just a matter of time until it unravels.
So I think the average woman to get over that is 85. Is that right?
Right. I think so.
I don't want to be, out of the norm here. But,
yeah. No, my students say, like, does that end when you're 25? Like, no.
Definitely not.
No, it doesn't.
So Casey, give us a sense of the students with whom you work, and the ones that, you see a lot of them from freshman through senior, and then as they move on into graduate school. So you see them through an absolutely critical growth time, physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, it's huge when you're a college professor. The kids, the young people, I shouldn't call them kids, right? The women who are most successful in the transition. What are some of the common themes? What are the things that you see?
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh, I'm thinking of so many students that I've seen come into my office. I teach Psych 100, so I see a lot of the first year students.
Right.
And then I teach the senior seminar courses, where I get to see them 4 years later.
Right.
And you're right, it's just incredible the amount of change that I see. And I think what I'd like to see the most is when a first year or sophomore student comes into my office and says, I'm going to try this. I think I might suck at it, but I'm going to try it anyway. Like, you do that. Go for it. That's exactly, I love it. Report back and let me know how it goes,
Okay.
And then they come back and they say, well, I tried it and it turns out it wasn't for me, or, I don't like that field, or I didn't like this internship, but it was amazing to go give it a shot and see how that was.
So it's risk-taking is one theme?
Yeah, I mean, in a safe way, not.
Yeah. No, I get you, right, yeah.
But risk-taking in terms of, not feeling afraid to try something new and not feeling afraid to not be perfect at it.
That goes to Carol Dweck. Yeah, that goes to the Carol Dweck thing about the fixed versus growth mindset.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, and we're all on the same page. I think, the students that I see who are really making the most of this transition are the ones that are really developing a self-awareness about how much they can handle. What are their limits? At what point do they become overwhelmed? And when they keep their lives and their responsibilities within that limit, they really get to explore and try new things and sort of expand themselves in a nice way that's not too overwhelming. And I think that balance is really the key. I've tried to instill that in my students wherever I see an opportunity.
Yeah, as a psych professor, you'll get the opportunity more than a lot of other professors, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff comes up in class. We talk about these issues, and I love in my classes when students raise these issues, they're talking about the scientific literature, but they're also talking about their lives right now.
Sure.
It's part of my job that I value the most.
Right. That's interesting. I went to nursing school when I was, in the coming up years. And I imagine there's some similarities. The nursing students, we would read about, whatever, some sort of genetic disorder and go, oh my gosh, I have that, right? So I imagine the psychology students are like, I am crazy. I didn't know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think that happens to all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what role do friendships play in these transitions, the peer-to-peer?
Yeah, that's a big part of your writing too.
Right. And so friends are, I think, critically important at all stages of development. Earlier in childhood and adolescence, friends are how kids learn important things like conflict resolution and, how to be emotionally open and vulnerable with someone that's not your family member where you sort of have to be, How do you choose which friends you're going to let into your life in that way? And how do you deal with friends sort of transitioning, elementary school kids and middle school kids often have these, best friendships, but then they fade. And that's a really important emotional experience to learn from. And then later on, we see that friends in adolescence help young people deal with, breakups or academic disappointments, athletic disappointments, or celebrate the great moments too. And they're also a really important source of support for difficult things that are going on at home.
And is there a difference between the boys and the girls in terms of their friendships and how?
So that's a great question. Developmentally, we don't see huge differences in the meaning of friends. It's more the sort of what we would call the content of how those things happen. So boys tend to get those benefits in somewhat different ways than girls do from their friendships, but the outcome's kind of the same.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We recently interviewed a guest, and you're going to have to remind me, Mr. Alfred Poor. Alfred Poor.
Yep.
And he is a kind of a coach helping young people transition from high school to college, and kind of talking about choice in colleges, what sort of ways to set yourself up academically and transition. And one of the things that he brought up as something to talk about the immaturity or the development is slower than it was when we were coming up, is that the texting to your friends in high school prevents you from separating from them and becoming open to new friendships on campus.
Right.
And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a topic we could talk about for hours, the role of technology, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But I do see texting and, FaceTime and Skype and all this stuff is, it's turning into sort of a lifeline to parents that can be good and can be bad. I think it's wonderful for students to be able to say, like, hey, Mom, I had a tough day. I'm thinking about you. And then the parent can respond, like, love you. Let me know if you want to talk. That sort of thing is, I think, wonderful. But when I see kids continuing to, what should I have for lunch? Or, I'm not sure. Should I do my homework first, or should I take a nap? Like, what should I do? And parents are advising, so the technology provides this sort of extra, it removes some of that autonomy, I think, in a way. Yeah. And on the same point with friends, I think one of the findings from my study was that people compare themselves to their peers and feel better or worse about themselves depending on how they're doing. Mm-hmm. And when you've got Facebook pages and everybody's saying, I got this amazing internship, and you're automatically primed to think, well, I didn't, so.
Yeah. That's like the Christmas letter, that was always Christmas letter times a million. Daily Christmas letter now.
Right. It's true.
How great.
I never thought about
everybody
that.
else's life is wonderful.
Right,
yeah. And on the flip side, I mean, people who see what others are doing and then evaluate themselves positively in comparison, they get a benefit from that. But
absolutely. Or inspired by what somebody else is doing. And
true.
Think, I can do that. If they can do that, I can do that.
Yeah. And that's what I see at Mount Holyoke, at least. Our students are really inspired by each other, and they really cheer each other on. So that's one of the ways that all this stuff works really positively.
That's great.
For friendship piece, yeah.
Well, let me just ask you one last question, and that would be, if you were talking to a parent of a 15-year-old right now, we've got one over here, and any of our listeners and viewers as well. If you were talking to a parent of a 15-year-old and they're starting to look at college and what comes after college, what would you say to them to help them prepare their child for the transitions that are ahead of them in the next few years?
Wow. Well, I would say first and foremost, allow that 15-year-old to sort of drive the car, if you will. Parents should be helping identify opportunities and helping to ask questions that allow the 15-year-old to think about, like, how would I fit at this college or that college? And, just sort of imagining the possibilities, but from a supportive player role. Mm-hmm. Instead of sort of identifying, like, here are all the brochures and you're going to apply to all these colleges. And I think, sort of allowing the child to take up those ideas as they come, as opposed to forcing it upon them, can be really helpful. And I know I'm thinking, of course, there are parents who see that their children need a lot of support and want to provide that. And so I think there are ways that you can raise these conversations with kids that don't necessarily have that managerial controlling component to them.
Yeah.
Asking, doing the kind of talk with the 15-year-old where you say, well, how do you feel about this? What's important to you?
Right.
Asking open-ended questions instead of yes or no questions has a way of having the child draw out their own narrative about what they want to experience. And that can be a really valuable skill that they use later on.
Right.
Absolutely. It's definitely tempting. It's tempting to want to do it all for them because you just want to get them into the best school or the best, program. It's hard to let them be the driver.
Yeah.
To me, you have to sit back and go, what's that about? I want my kid. I'm not pointing at you, even though I went like that, but all of us, I think there's so much secondary gain that we have to divorce ourselves from.
Right.
And by that I mean we get a lot of positive vibe from my child's at Yale
Very
or my
true.
child's at, wherever, or my child gets all A's.
Absolutely.
So we get a lot of reflection on that. And so what's that about? And I think that kind of harkens back to my earlier question, like, what is it about our generation that needs to be helicopter parents? What are we getting from that? What's motivating that? It's interesting to me.
Yeah, well, and the economy lately hasn't helped either. I mean, I think the economic context over the past several years has made that even more difficult, where it feels like there's this narrowing window of opportunity, and you have to make sure that you're going to get through it. There's that much more pressure than there used to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, we are out of time, but this was a fascinating conversation.
Really
There's
fascinating.
lots that we could talk about, even more than this, but this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Casey. Why don't you share with our listeners and our viewers what projects you're working on, anything that you would like them to know about what
Where
you're
we can
doing,
find you?
where we can find you, stuff like that.
Well, you can find me on Mount Holyoke's website, which is mtholyoke.edu. And I also have my own research website, which is KC Haydon, that's HAYDON.com. And there you'll see I have a couple projects going on now. One is a study where we're looking at how romantic partners argue with each other. And
We're
specifically,
going to come back to you on that one.
We are.
we're looking at how people, once the conflict ends, how do you transition out of conflict and get back to business as usual? Because we think that's an important skill in kind of allowing conflict to be contained and not spill over into other parts of family life.
I love that.
Well,
Perfect.
that's our latest project.
Nice.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Oh my God.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
I love it. Thanks. I really enjoyed this.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. We
Thank
did
you
too.
so much.
So great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mighty Married Moms. Tune in twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays to meet fascinating and inspiring guests who will help you create the life you've always wanted.
You can find these episodes and special gifts just for you at mightymarriedmoms.com, as well as a link to our Facebook community.
Where we continue the conversation around the kitchen table. Please also help share the love by leaving a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.